Great to have you at the World Government Summit. We have a full house ready to listen to your thought about the world, about yourself, about your value. You are a mentor, but today you are a mentor for 4,000 people. So before we start our session, I would like just to play a video, then I'll ask you a couple of questions.
I studied the 10 most powerful empires over the last 500 years and the last 3 reserve currencies. It took me through the rise and decline of the Dutch Empire and the guilder, the British Empire and the pound, the rise and early decline in the United States Empire and the dollar, and the decline and rise of the Chinese Empire and its currencies, as well as the rise and decline of the Spanish, German, French, Indian, Japanese, Russian, and Ottoman empires, along with their significant conflicts, as measured in this chart. To understand China's patterns better, I also studied the rise and fall of Chinese dynasties and their monies back to the year 600. Because looking at all these measures at once can be confusing, I'll focus on the 4 most important ones: the Dutch, British, US, and Chinese. You'll quickly notice the pattern. Now let's simplify the form a bit. As you can see, they transpired in overlapping cycles that lasted about 250 years, with 10 to 20-year transition periods between them. Typically, these transitions have been periods of great conflict because leading powers don't decline without a fight. So how am I measuring an empire's power? In this study, I used 8 metrics. Each country's measure of total power is derived by averaging them together. They are education, inventiveness and technology development, competitiveness in global markets, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, the power of their financial center for capital markets, and the strength of their currency as a reserve currency. Because these powers are measurable, we can see how strong each country is now, was in the past, and whether they're rising or declining. By examining the sequences from many countries, we can see how a typical cycle transpires. And because the wiggles can be confusing, we can simplify it a bit to focus on the pattern of cause-effect relationships that drive the rise and decline of a typical empire. As you can see, better education typically leads to increased innovation and technology development, and with a lag, the establishment of the currency as a reserve currency. You can also see that these forces then declined in a similar order, reinforcing each other's decline. Let's now look at the typical sequence of events going on inside a country that produces these rises and declines. In a nutshell, the big cycle typically begins after a major conflict, often a war, establishes the new leading power and the new world order. Because no one wants to challenge this power, a period of peace and prosperity typically follows. As people get used to this peace and prosperity, they increasingly bet on it continuing. They borrow money to do that, which eventually leads to a financial bubble. The empire's share of trade grows, and when most transactions are conducted in its currency, it becomes a reserve currency, which leads to even more borrowing. At the same time, this increased prosperity distributes wealth unevenly, so the wealth gap typically grows between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Eventually, the financial bubble bursts, which leads to the printing of money and increased internal conflict between the rich and the poor, which leads to some form of revolution to redistribute wealth. This can happen peacefully or as a civil war. While the empire struggles with this internal conflict, its power diminishes relative to external rival powers on the rise. When a new rising power gets strong enough to compete with the dominant power that is having domestic breakdowns, external conflicts, most typically wars, take place. Out of these internal and external wars come new winners and losers. Then the winners get together to create the new world order. And the cycle begins again.
Beautiful video, very short, insightful. And let me start by, in your book, you talked about 5 forces in changing world order. What are they?
Well, I learned in my lifetime. I'm a practical guy who has to invest in the markets and make bets on all of these things. But I learned in my lifetime that many times that I was surprised, it was because those things didn't happen in my lifetime, but they happened before. I could tell you many stories like that. So there are 3 things that are happening now in our lifetimes that didn't happen before, but happened many times in history that required me to study this. And then there were 2 others I paid a lot of attention to. So first, the amount of spending more than we're earning, creating a lot of debt, and the monetization of that debt. What is the value of money? What is debt money? Okay, what do we use as money? And how does that work? The second is the amount of internal conflict between the left and the right, the rich and the poor, differences in values. By any of the measures, you can see I like to use statistics, there's the greatest political gaps, the greatest internal conflicts. Third is external conflict, the great power conflict. In other words, when you have 2 great empires, 2 or more, that are comparable in power, and then there's the conflict associated with those. Those didn't happen in our lifetimes, but they happened before. Those 3 drew my attention. When I studied history, I also saw the 4th really becoming apparent, which is acts of nature. Interesting. Acts of nature, droughts, floods, and pandemics, have killed more people and toppled more civilizations than the first 3, including wars. So I saw that. And then what was apparent, of course, through technology is number 5, which is the most important, which is human learning and the development of technologies. So those 5 factors, those 5 forces, drive just about everything. And so that's really my lens. And in order to see that, what is the rise and decline of currencies and all of this, I needed to go back and study. But those are the 5.
You looked at the pattern of the past 500 years, the rise and fall of civilization, nation, where we know that we are in an interesting time in human civilization. The world is changing. We live in the most exciting time. We know that the next 500 years will be different. The money will be different. Technology will disrupt everything. Economy will be different. So can you predict the same pattern that will happen? Whatever happened in the past 500 years will continue?
I think we can understand through not only seeing the patterns, but I think we know some things about cause-effect relationships. And then again, what we don't know is much greater than what we do know. But I do think, like if we were looking at today, we would say, of course, the financial condition of a country, an individual, a company, matters. Income statement, balance sheet, how are you doing? Productivity, that matters. We do know that how we are with each other, whether we're working well together and competing in a healthy way to raise productivity and our living standards, we know those things matter, and you can measure those and you can see those. We do know what the external conflicts are like. We see it every day. You can measure it in numbers and so on. Those things are timeless and universal. We do know that acts of nature will continue. And we do know, I think, that the greatest force of evolution through human inventiveness and technology. So we are at the brink of a new world in which the technologies are going to radically change a lot of the things that we know, but we don't know how. So when I look at all those things, I think we know what I just described, and then what we don't know is how we're going to think in the future, how our minds will work, how technology will evolve, and how that's going to have a ripple effect, which we're going to see radical changes over the next 5 years. Over the next 5 years, not 500 years.
5 years.
5 years, we're going to see it. Then if you take 5 years and you go to 10, the world is going to change in all of these respects in dramatic ways over the next 10 years, radically. I think we know those things. Exactly how that's going to play out and what, no, I can't tell you.
Let me talk about today. You've been talking about United States, China. Who is winning the race?
Well, there are a lot of races going on. I'll call them wars. There's a trade war and a technology war. There's a geopolitical influence war. There's an economic and capital war. And there's a military war. We are in the first 4 of those wars, and we're at the brink of a military war. Brink doesn't mean that we're going to go over the brink. Everybody, hopefully we don't go over the brink. But if we're taking those types of wars, it depends how long you want me to answer that, because I could go through each one of those. But the charts that were shown.
So don't worry about the chart. I run the chart.
Trade war. China's winning the trade war. If you just take the numbers, the percentage of world trade and dominance, the geopolitical war has become one in which not long ago the United States was a dominant power. It just had to express what it wanted and other countries would respond and so on. Now you go from country to country and the constant question I get is China or the United States? And the answer to that question typically comes back. If it's economic, it's China. If it's military, the question is whether the United States will be there when we need them or not. That's a most common answer across other places. So there's a combination. So it's a heck of a competition. The technology war, very interesting in many ways. There are going to be amazing technologies developed by both places, and so you say in this way the United States is winning, in that way another winning, and there's going to be those competitions. The real winners, by the way, I think, are those who can tap into both, and the unaligned countries that are being able to do that. If you take the capital war and the economic war, it's, again, more China than the United States in that the growth rate is faster, and also we're seeing a change in now the denomination of currencies that trade and capital flows are in. We're beginning, which we didn't have before, we're beginning the internationalization of the renminbi as part of a process. Still, but the United States is dominant currently today in that area. Then in terms of military war, that becomes an interesting question. It's a hell of a competition.
Yes. Let me go to the United States. And then I'll ask the same thing, same question about China. Is the threat for the United States external or an internal threat?
The far greater threat is an internal threat, because basically, be strong. If you're strong and you're healthy, then you're going to be domestically and internationally well off. And so what we have is a deterioration of infrastructure, education, political conflict, leadership, those types of issues that are undermining it. You could see the changes in the cities, New York, Chicago, and places like that, opiate issues, a lot of those problems, how people are with each other, is undermining the health. The United States, I was very lucky. I was born in 1949, 4 years after the New World Order began. And just the idea of that there was, I was raised by 2 parents who cared for me. I had public school education. and I came out to a country of equal opportunity in which anyone in the world could come and be a citizen equally likely, a rule of law, fabulous environment. You could not compete in anywhere in the world that was like that. And that it has changed, and that has been a factor. So it's most importantly how we are with ourselves. Do we hold ourselves individually to a high standard in which you're productive and you contribute and you build a financial situation that's good? So how we are with each other is the dominant internally. The United States and a number of countries are at war with themselves, and that's affecting those things. So you have to fix those fundamentals.
Is China in a better shape for the same question?
Very similar questions. Similar questions. You have two greatly different approaches to the world, right? So now one great man, Wang Qishan is the vice president of China, a very objective man, described it essentially that the United States is a country of individuals and individualism. You had Elon Musk on before and so on. The individual, the power of the individual. And it's therefore bottom up. And then China is top down. In other words, it's Confucian and how each individual should relate to each other. And then that gets manifest in how the governance system works, how the Communist Party works, how the whole governance system, how the media works, how information is controlled. You have a different place. You have one place that's more anarchistic and creative and highly disorderly and so on. The other place, which they're trying to achieve the balance better, but it is really more top down. So those are two different approaches. And of course, we all around here, we go to different variations. Every place has a different variation. So how that works out, we'll see.
Where is India in your book? I mean, you talk China, United States, and there is a huge country with tremendous wealth. Where is India?
India is the country, from all of the statistics using 10-year growth rates and also just what's apparent, India will have probably the greatest growth rate, the fastest growth rate economically, have the greatest transformation of any country. And I would say, like, if I was going to paint the world, there is this great power conflict and lots of things going on that are great and terrible in both China and the United States. And then there's the countries that are not in that, the neutral countries. So here we are in the UAE, and you think about what's going on here and in Saudi and so on. Or you go to Singapore and you look at what's happening in the ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on, and you look at India. It's an advantage through all history and world wars. Those that have not been involved in the wars and stand aside from the wars actually prosper from whatever conflicts exist. So we're going to have different types of wars between those two states, but India is going to be. Now, the dynamic of it is very interesting because it's not really open. It's dominated by a few families. It's not an easy place to get into, and the capital markets haven't developed it to the extent that they should develop. They will develop probably. So there's a great deal of potential, but actually, is there going to be that kind of opening up that is going to create that kind of vibrancy for us all? India will do great, I think, and then the question is, what does that mean for the rest of us?
Europe?
Europe is, a wonderful place to go enjoy life. It is beautiful. It's, and then on the other hand, it's a collection of countries which are, by most measures, economically, militarily, politically, trade-wise, and so on, not competitive. It's old in terms, it doesn't have the vibrancy. If you were to think about what is necessary in terms of the technologies, let's say, only two areas now in the world, the United States and China, in terms of going to really the scale of the great technologies that we're talking about, having a revolutionary thing. So it's a declining. It's not a powerful place. It's financially, it's got problems. Militarily, it's limited. It's highly fragmented, and it's a beautiful place to go visit.
Thank you. We do visit every summer there. Ray, I mean, let's move from the word to you. What's your mission in life?
I'm 73 years old, and I think there's a life arc. I'm at the stage in my life arc where I'm transitioning to my last stage in life. I think life has three stages, basically. First stage, you're dependent on others, you're learning. Second stage, you're on your own, you're independent. Others become dependent on you, and you're trying to be successful. And then you go into the stage that I'm going into, which I'm into, in which you transition. And the beauty is to see other people successful without you, and just to pass along those things that might be helpful for others. So that's the stage in life that I am. I'm going to do this. I have one more book to write, which principles. I put their principles, meaning things that, like recipes, how to do this and that I've learned, and I want to pass those along. And by the way, I encourage everybody to do that. I put out a journal to help everybody write their own principles, because it's been an amazing experience for me to do that. It's helped me. I convert the principles into algorithms that help me make decisions, and everybody can do that. But anyway, I'm at that stage in my life where that's what I want to do, pass that along. I'll do that probably until the next book comes out, which would be Economic and Investment Principles, and then I'll be done.
If we have 150 government with us in the World Government Summit, what's your advice to government? I mean, if you have a perfect model, how this model should look like?
I think the key question is whether man, whether internally or externally, has the capacity to rise above oneself, to look at what is the collective good, so that, because there are win-win relationships and there are lose-lose relationships. And so in history, that desire, I am going to fight to keep my money or whatever it is, that produces outcomes that are disastrous. And so can the evolution of that take place? I wouldn't be optimistic about that. But it is the question of how we deal with each other is a fundamental question. And who knows? So everybody's dealing with the issues I just mentioned: the financial issue, the internal conflict issue, the external conflict issue. I would say that when I look at countries and I say, where do I want to invest, or where do I even want to be? There are those three things I look at. Is it good financially? Is a place have financial resources to do things well? Is it going to be internal conflict or external conflict? External conflict. And then the technology and those types of things. So I would say that the measures are all there. In the book, I have 18 measures that are measured statistically. They're a health index. You can look at that, and that index is like if you go into a doctor's office and you take checking your vitals. Those indices, those measures are there. And if you make those good, you will have a greater longevity and a greater prosperity. So when I think about that, I think, they're clear, what's health, and then also of paramount importance is, can we rise above that with existing self-discipline and discipline with how we're dealing with others? That'll be of paramount importance.
Thank you. Thank you. We are running out of time. I would like just to capture the opportunity and ask you just quick answer, if you can. You meditate.
I'm sorry?
You meditate.
Yes.
Why and what you do?
Oh, I'd say transcendental meditation I've done since 1969, however long that was. And it is, more than anything else, it has been the most fabulous thing. That and writing down principles and converting them to algorithms are the main thing. Okay, it's meditation, the one I do, is a mantra. So it's a word that has no particular meaning. A good example of that might be Om. It's a sound. And you sit there quietly and repeat that in your mind. And when you do that, your conscious thoughts go away, and you're in this Om, because when you're saying Om to yourself, you can't have those thoughts. And then that disappears. And when that disappears, you go into a subconscious state. You're not conscious, you're not unconscious. And from that subconscious state, it comes all sorts of creativity. And also, we're largely driven by our subconscious more than our conscious. All the subconscious things that are going on and create the motivations. And so it helps to align those two things. And it gives a peace. 20 minutes of meditation is like 3 hours of sleep, and it gives one an equanimity. It's like, I think in like the ninja movies, you know, they're fighting all fast, and then, then they put it into slow motion, because like for the ninja, it's just things coming at you, and you deal with those things. So that's what meditation is like.
Thank you. What is your biggest success in life?
I suppose evolving and I hope contributing to evolution. I think evolution is the only thing that's permanent and is what we do. And we're all on a ride. And so I think that I've been on the ride. And so it's not money. It's not power or influence or anything. It's that, and then I think it's reflected in my family. Those kinds of things.
Did you had failure?
Oh, lots of failures.
The biggest one?
I'm a professional mistake maker.
What was the biggest failure?
Well, I mean, one I remember is in 1982, this changed my life. 1982, I'd calculated that American banks had lent more money to foreign countries than those countries were going to be able to pay back. I thought there'd be a big debt crisis. I spoke openly about that. And then Mexico defaulted in August 1982, and a number of countries started to default. And I thought that we were going to have an economic collapse, terrible collapse. And I couldn't have been more wrong. It was the exact bottom in the stock market, August 1982, when Mexico defaulted. I lost money for me. I lost money for my clients. I was so broke, I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to help to pay for family bills. And that changed my life. I realized, first it gave me the humility that I needed to deal with my audacity. I knew that I didn't want to do this anymore, but I didn't want to lose the upside. So what I did is I learned, okay, how can I get the upside with that kind of risk? And I learned basically two things. First, to try to find the smartest people I could who disagreed with me to try to stress test. And because the power of great triangulation is one of the things I learned. And then I learned how I could diversify my portfolios and my decision making that in a way that would not reduce my returns but would reduce my risk by 80%, because the power of diversification of equally good things works that way. And that was the bottom, and then from there that changed. And I really learned, I have a principle which is pain plus reflection equals progress. Because pain will teach you about reality. And if you can reflect calmly on those realities and think, how do I deal with reality? Well, and so I think mistakes are a good thing, learning experiences. Otherwise you have successes and you don't change.
If you'll give me 3 advice in life, 3 advice in life.
Okay. First, know your nature. We each have a nature. Those are the things that are our pulls, what we tend to be inclined to do, and so on. And I think life is a journey of knowing your nature and finding the path for your nature. And then accept the fact that it's going to be a ride. And that through that, the ups and the downs and so on, that's your learning experience, that's your journey. And so I would say also, be very related to that, number 2, is realize that whatever you know is immaterial relative to what you don't know. And so give yourself the power of great open-mindedness and also the power to diversify and to place your bets in a way that allows you to succeed, given that. Let's see, number 3, what would number 3 be? I don't know. Realize that success is having a life that you want to have. Don't look at the definition of success like money. Like money has no intrinsic value. Money only will get you what it buys. So think about what you want in terms of truly those things. I think life is a matter of meaningful work and meaningful relationships. If you have meaningful work and you have meaningful relationships, most importantly, meaningful relationships, I think that creates a successful life. Those are the 3 that come to mind.
Ray, thank you very much. It was very insightful for all of us. We started from the word, we ended up with you and I here on the stage. Mr. Dalia will have a book signing outside. You can join us if you want. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.